Hello and welcome to Angel's Costumes Behind the Seams. I'm Jeremy Angel.
And I'm Jonathan Littman.
And I'm Richard Green.
This week I'm excited to release my interview with Nat Turner. Nat is a costume designer. He used to work for Angels. He's had quite a journey through his career, and I should probably apologise up front because leaving Nat and I with an open mic is probably not a great idea because we have a habit of talking.
1 hour later.
It was lovely to sit down and talk with Nat. He's had a really interesting journey as a costume person. I mean, he's worked on some fantastic films as an assistant designer, and in fact, when you look at it, his career is sort of similar in the way with Sinead, and they both work for Lindy as well.
Similar backgrounds, except
Yeah,
Nat went through the costuming route in order to establish the relationships that he then followed up after he'd worked and experienced, how the dynamics of a costume house.
Yeah, he worked for us for about 5 or 6 years, didn't he?
6 years, yeah. So Nat worked for us in the contemporary department.
And Bart.
Yeah.
You guys might know this. When did Mr. Tim start? As in the naming Mr. Tim.
Well, it was a leftover from his uncle. It was Mr.
He was.
Tim.
I mean, he was. I when I joined in '83, he was Mr. Tim then, because it was a kind of rite of passage where eventually he went, for God's sake, just call me Tim. But everybody at that point was Mr. Alex, Mr. Daniel,
Well,
Mr.
yeah, only
Tim.
because you couldn't say Mr. If you said Mr. Angel, then you could have been referring to 3 people. And when we used to have to line up for our wage sheet on a weekly basis on the ground floor against the bookcase on a Friday,
with our caps in our hands,
and then go and spend it all in the evening.
Go spend it on luxuries like food.
Well, no, I just find it really interesting because I've interviewed 3 of the 3 ex-members of Angel staff, and all of them as Mr. Tim, Mr. Tim, Mr. Tim. And I just didn't know when it started. But I just know members of staff have lost their names because of Dad. So you're never allowed to be called Tim in this building. But sorry, Nat, back to Nat. So Jonathan, you set up the contemporary department. How?
Did I?
So when Nat was working the contemporary department, that was when you stepped up to become a production director.
Richard Davis came in to work with me and Jacqueline Durran. And
was that at Shaftesbury? Was that at Camden?
Yes, at Shaftesbury. And Louise and Dan Grace. And when the move from Shaftesbury to Camden took place, we were left down at Shaftesbury to run the contemporary department, and stock was shifted down from Camden to Shaftesbury Avenue alongside the fancy dress, which was at that point in the basement and the ground floor.
Because at that time with contemporary, you were doing an awful lot of shopping and buying.
Yeah, it was very, very busy.
So it made sense to keep you down.
Yeah, and Jeffrey Marks stayed down at Shaftesbury, and then it became more important for the space to allocate that what was there to fancy dress, which then our move up to Camden.
And you were at the back of the 3rd floor, weren't you?
But
you weren't.
No, I came down into the offices at the point of that move, and Richard Davis carried on. And then at that point, he had this guy Rob, Guy Speranza, and Jennifer Davis. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, that's a very long-winded answer to your question. But I can't. I don't know whether that was 1976 or 1986 or 1996.
And wasn't Charlotte Morris there?
But Charlotte Walter was originally the person that kind of set up the 20th century costume contemporary department. And for a nanosecond, she was still around when Angels acquired Berman's.
The thing I find interesting, and I'm glad Nat goes into in the talk, is the assistant designing. We talk a lot more about it than to understand what they do and or what he does or how he sees assistant designing. But when you look at some of the designers he's assisted or been the assistant on, aside from Lindy Hemming, you've got Rona Russell, you've got Liza Bracey, Stephen Noble, Susie Harmon, Natalie Ward. He's just been assistant for some fantastic designers through his career.
Yes.
I think what's really important from what Nat was saying is that is the relationship that develops between the assistant and designer, and how the trust and the understanding that has to be established really quickly, and the dynamic between the two when it works is it's kind of quite exciting to observe, because they need to be able to read each other's minds.
Yeah, and in fact that's why when you get a successful pairing, they tend to carry on, don't they? Because there's almost this shorthand between them.
Sometimes I look at costume designers who are constantly shifting in terms of the teams that they have around them, and I think about that dynamic. I think why haven't they been able to form those kind of bonds, and vice versa? There are assistants that are constantly jumping, and everyone has their own reason for doing things, and circumstance and situation in terms of availability and of work, and
yeah.
We hope you've been enjoying these conversations. We've certainly been enjoying your feedback. Please email any feedback or questions to podcast@angels.co.uk. If you want to visit our website, it's www.angelsbehindtheseams.com, or you can find us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter /Costume Podcast. And here's my chat with Nat Turner. Today I'm joined by Nat Turner. Nat is a costume designer, but he has been in the industry quite a while. He started his career at Angels. He has been a standby, he's been assistant, he's worked as crowd supervisor. He's done quite a lot of roles in the costume industry, and I'm very excited to talk to him. So Nat, good morning and thank you for joining me.
Hello, thank you, no problem.
So Nat, what we've been trying to do with these interviews is just get a feel for the costume industry, what people do, what exists, and what people's thoughts are with it. We think it's a fantastic industry, but we don't think too much is actually known about the people who work in it, or, as I said, what they do. So what I'd love to start with is, where did it all start for you? We've got a long journey to go through. You've got lots of different things you've done, and I'm really intrigued to hear about the different evolutions and the different roles you've done. But how did you get to where you are today?
In the beginning, as they say, every great story. It's not mine's particularly great story, but anyway, my mum and dad were always wanted to be actors, but they couldn't because they had children. They were very, very involved in a theatre called the Questers in Ealing, which is quite a well-respected theatre, and they've been involved with it since the 60s, which is not quite when it started, but almost, and they're still involved in it now. That was my first thing, I suppose, because my mum and dad really wanted all of us to be actors, they made me try and be an actor for a bit, and I hated it with a passion. And my other siblings, my brother hated it too, so he didn't do it either. And my sister, she liked it and she tried to do it for a while, but it hasn't been that easy for her either. So yeah, I sort of, from that, that was where my first interest was, and I was sort of hanging around the theatre, and when my mum and dad were doing rehearsals and stuff like that, so all of their spare time was used up at the theatre basically. So, and they were doing all sorts of things, like my dad direct stuff there, and they acted there, and they did everything. And then so my mum sort of pushed me, I suppose, when I went to college. She sort of pushed me into theatre because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. Like, I knew that I loved films, and I did art. I did a BTEC in art. She sort of gave me a push because I was sort of I was whatever, like 18, 19. I didn't really know what to do. All I really wanted to do was go skateboarding all the time, which wasn't probably going to make me a living. Although subsequently, some of my friends that I did skateboard with did make a living out of it. But anyway, I don't think I would have done because I wasn't quite that good. Yeah, so she pushed me, and I followed because I was a impressionable teenager, and I ended up going up to Hartlepool to Cleveland College of Art and Design to do an HND, and that was great because it got me away from my mum and dad for like 2 years. So it was awesome, and I loved it, and I could still go skateboarding all the time. And as many beans as I possibly could, because I just save all of my money to buy more skateboards with, really. But also, I was learning stuff about theatre at the time, and it was more of a practical course, I suppose. So it was more based around doing models and all the model boxes, and I loved all that stuff. Because as a kid, I used to make... I sound like a sort of someone from the Second World War, but I used to make aeroplanes and stuff, like airfix kits with my dad. That was one of the things we used to like do. So I loved making models in the first place. So
it's interesting you say that. It's always something. It's we'll get. I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's my dad's always said that when he's looked for people at Angels, he likes looking at people that aren't what you'd expect, or aren't doing what you'd expect. So it's people who are into the making their clothes for their dummies, for painting models, for making models, the people who want to get their hands dirty and involved and are creative in that sense. And those are sometimes the people who make the best costumiers, because it's something they enjoy, and that's where the passions come from, rather than just from the books.
When I started at Angels, it was full of all these weird people, and that's what I loved about it. There's so many. I mean, with all the respect in the world, like the characters in Angels were amazing. Just working at Angels really gave me what I became, because I was still sort of floundering even after I'd left college.
But sorry, I derailed you. I apologise.
So yeah, I went to Hartlepool for 2 years and got away from mum and dad and did entertainment crafts, I think it was called at the time. Some people from that college, there was a sort of link between Cleveland College of Art and Design and St Martin's in a way. Like some people had got into St Martin's from there onto the theatre course. I had a girlfriend at the time, and we both decided that we were going to apply to the degree course for theatre design in St Martin's and go there together. We did that, and then miraculously we both got in, which was quite rare, I think, because it was a really competitive course, and I'm sure it still is. At the time, it was like St Martin's or Wimbledon, I think, were the two courses you went to. I was sort of sticking with theatre because at the time, and I think I'm right in saying this, there wasn't any kind of film design courses, because we're going way back now.
It has been much more recent, and recent being 10-15 years rather than 20-30 years ago. That there was, I think, I could be very wrong, and I'll happily have an educator correct me on that one, but I think it was much more theatre, and it was more of the theatre, and it was costume and set, and rather than specific costume things everywhere.
Yeah, so yeah, we both got in, which was amazing, and for 3 years, and it was in the times of Dermot Hayes, who I believe is still at St Martin's, is still the course leader or something. And I think we were the last course that was termed theatre design, the last year that was termed as theatre design. It then subsequently has become design for performance, because even while I was there, it wasn't really strictly theatre, although we were making model boxes and designing costumes, and there was a sort of performance art kind of thing going on at the same time. So we sort of had to do these devised performances, which I obviously hated, because I didn't want to be an actor. I wanted to be behind everything else, because I didn't want that sort of attention. You know what I mean? You know, they were very valuable. But they were really valuable, because it was really interesting, actually, because one of the things, because I think I expressed my distaste for doing them at some point to one of the tutors, and the ideology behind it was kind of like, well, if you're expecting an actor, let's say an actor, to wear a costume that you've designed, then you need to know what it feels like to be in that, and to what difference that will make to you. And I think it's really true, and it's always stuck with me. You're asking an actor to put on clothes that aren't their own, not necessarily even their own sort of style, because there's always a complication between the actor's idea of themselves and what suits them, and the costume that you may have to put them into. And there's that sort of negotiation where it's not always going to be exactly what they think suits them.
Yeah, and it's having that understanding. I talk about it with Vivienne Campbell when we talk about Vivienne and how she got in the industry. She used to do something called FT2 that used to exist.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
And she was trained for 2 years in different departments. So the whole point of it was she might be wanting to get into costume, but she'd have an understanding of what camera want, what sound want, what props want. And I suppose that's that with what you have is very similar to that, which is you need to understand how it feels to be an actor. Well, one view is clearly you need to feel to how an actor would be in the costume and everything, and that gives you a greater understanding. So that's quite interesting, actually.
Yeah, and my understanding was it's horrific. Yeah, so it was amazing. It was amazing, and it was weird because I went there expecting to be taught, but they don't really teach you. Well, they didn't when I was there. They don't really teach you. It's kind of like this weird osmosis where you're surrounded by all these kind of amazing European, all these students from Europe and stuff. Like we had loads of Danish people and Swedish people and Japanese people and all these people that I'd never met before. And you sort of by osmosis of being together in a sort of shared experience and talking about stuff and interacting with each other, so you become this thing, which kind of shouldn't work, but I feel like it kind of did. It was really weird. They didn't really ever. We had discussions and stuff like that with tutors, but they kind of left you to it. They sort of got a project, and then you had, I don't know, well, I can't remember what it was, like maybe 2 months or something, and you know, to come back with, you know, all the costume designs and the theatre and the set design and a model box and all this stuff and present it. That was kind of it, and it was up to you really as to how much work you were going to put in or not put in. And at that time, I was actually quite conscientious. Not that I'm not conscientious now, obviously, but I was really, really dead set on. I really wanted to get a good mark. I don't know why, because lots of the people on the course were kind of like, "Well, we're in London, let's go mental." And I was kind of like, "But we have to study. I need to look at this stuff."
You were the one on the course that you took it all seriously. You had to do the work.
I really was, and I didn't get a first, but I was okay with that. So I suppose conceptually, it helped me making worlds, I suppose, which is what we're doing in costume all the time.
It was what you needed at the time.
And it is experience, and it was great, and I really, really value it. But I can't really understand how it helped me, but it did. So I had to sort of figure out what I was going to do. Again, this is my real introduction into the film world, I suppose. I was living in this flat. And we were just finishing. We had our degree sharp and all this, and we got this phone call one day to the flat, and it was like, "Oh, is that Nat?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then they started going on and on about this film that they were going to make, and I was like, "Wicked! I'm going to get a job from my degree show at last, you know." And they're going through the whole thing, and they're like, "Oh yeah," I was kind of like, "What are they talking about?" Because they're not talking about me. I was kind of like, "Oh, you know, this is Nat Turner, yeah?" And they were like, "Oh, is it? Oh no, we wanted Nat somebody else, right?" So somebody with the same name as me had lived in my flat, and they're like, "Oh yeah, and he's a grip or something, and we need him to do this film." And I was like, "Oh, well, that's not me, and I don't really know what that is." So that's a shame. But do you need any help in the art department or anything? And they were like, "Yeah, we might do actually. Yeah, we'll get back to you." And then. Yeah, and then they did. So So I ended up working in the art department on a low budget film, British film. And yeah, I was an art director on this low budget film.
What was it?
It was called Being Considered, and it was directed by a man called Jonathan Newman. It was super low budget. It was literally going around people's houses and borrowing stuff from them to dress sets with and stuff because we just had no money. So it was fun, but then I was kind of like, because I suppose all the way through St Martin's, I was like, yeah, I want to do set design because you know it seems substantial and impressive and stuff like that. But all the way through it, I was doing these costume designs because you had to do both when you were doing the project. You had to do the costumes and the set, and I really enjoyed it. When I had done this art directing, I was kind of like, oh, that was kind of awful. That's not really for me. It's just, it was just sort of figuring out where we were going to get a leather sofa from and stuff like that. It didn't seem very personal to me, I suppose. There wasn't I suppose on the level that I was doing it anyway, there was kind of no psychological involvement. And then I was a painter and decorator. So this is how you get into costume. In the time, so that was, I suppose I spent a year again, not really having any idea what I was doing or how to get into the film industry, because at that time it felt a lot more closed and it was a lot smaller as well. To be fair, I mean, there was the industry then was. It was very small. It felt very small to me anyway. I might have been wrong because we didn't have all these massive blockbusters coming here all the time, and Netflix and all the rest of it. It was kind of like low budget British films or TV, which I had no involvement with or understanding how to get into it. And so I was just kind of trying to busk on low budget TV, really.
And how did you find out about Angels? Because this is one thing that's come up.
So all the way through some minds, I didn't really know Matt Price. I knew him a bit because he was living with my mate. He had started at working at Angels first, and he'd gone into the period department, I think. He was working in men's, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And then for some reason, I think maybe I'd met him when we went out to the pub once or something like that, and then it stuck in his head or something, I suppose. He phoned me, I think, and just said, "Oh, there's a job going at Angels," and he was quite enjoying it, and he was like, "If you want, I can give him your CV or whatever." I was like, "Wicked, that sounds good," because I still didn't know what I was doing. And I was like, "Well, that might give me some direction." I'd liked costume at college, and so I did. So I put it in, and then got an interview. In fact, I think we all went round on there was like a load of people, and we went round, I think, and someone showed us around, maybe Jonathan, possibly.
It was either going to be, 2000, Jonathan would have moved. It might be Richard Davis.
The vacancy was in contemporary department, and it was just as Sarah Howes was moving into being the head of contemporary, and Richard Davis was moving from contemporary into the men's period, wasn't it? That was right. Yeah. He was head of men's.
Yeah.
I think I got shown around by somebody, and they were sort of showing us stuff, and I think I'd managed to get some kind of intelligence out of my face that they thought, yeah, he looks like he might be interesting. And I had an interview with Sarah, and I think she liked me, and then I think I had to come back. I had to come back later, and on another day to see Mr. Tim, I believe, which was a bit more intimidating because I wasn't very used to I don't know, people in power, I suppose, or people who have, I don't know, exhibit their power. I hadn't met anybody like your dad before, I suppose.
Just so people know, my dad is known around the building as Mr. Tim. I don't know when that started, actually. Maybe it's just always been that way.
I have to thank Richard Davis and Sarah Howes and obviously Mr. Tim Angel for giving me a job, because then I started, and at that time, you had to do, I think it was 6 months. You had to do 6 months of returns before you were allowed to do anything, go anywhere near pulling costumes or anything like that. You had to do six months of returns and finding out where everything was. And we were in Camden as well, which was absolutely marvellous. Just living my dream, my Camden dreams. I loved it. I loved it for ages and ages. And it was fantastic. And, just... Again, weird. Again, a bit like St. Martin's, by osmosis, I feel a little bit, and being just around just the sheer amount of clothing information that was in that building, it sort of comes into you like a sponge, and you just sort of see things, and they just lodge in your brain as to what all these things are. I mean, don't get me wrong, people taught us, and in those days, that Roger Tonks is amazing, and also what was the librarian lady's name? It was amazing. So we used to have this library. There was in the Camden, there was a library and a librarian there, full time employed. And if you didn't know something, then she'd phone up whoever. She'd phone up the Houses of Parliament if you didn't know which gown there were, and find it out.
The Angels Internet. That was basically how she worked. I mean, the library. It's still here to a point. Actually, we've got most of all the books and everything, but it's amazing how many people won't use it.
But it was her. She was amazing. I loved her so much, and she was just like a wealth of information.
We've got cabinets of all the stuff. So if she started doing research for a job and would go and get newspaper clippings and stuff, we've got it all. So hypothetically, let's say you were doing, you wanted information on Lord of the Rings, you'd go through these files, and you'd find a folder for Lord of the Rings, and
I don't know what started her keeping all these different things for random films, but she had cuttings about Lord of the Rings, pictures from magazines, extracts from books. I mean, genuinely, what we use the internet for now, we still have all that research all still here, but it was incredible what she did.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. She was like invaluable and just a lovely person as well. It was great. One of my favourite parts of jobs now is research, and I don't know if that's in part down to her slightly. Even though what was brilliant was you could just go there and just go, "Oh, can you tell us about this?" And she'd be like, "Yeah, here you go. Here's the information," and you'd be like, "Amazing."
And it wasn't just the costume that, I mean, you've mentioned Roger and a few other people, but you were there. I mean, early 2000s, the crop of people that were working at Angels. If you look at where a lot of them are today, and the sort of the older generation before that as well, you had some incredible personalities with just some incredible knowledge on costume. And even if you just look at, as I said, the few people who came around at that point, where you guys are all now, you, Matt, Ian, Bart, you keep going. It's you. There were an incredible bunch of costumiers who came in starting, and the ones leaving. I think Mike Hodge was there, and Maria,
Mike, and also
Holly
Waddington. Yeah, Mark Lord, the Dark Lord, was there still. I think. He was still there. I think I was there for a year before he left.
And you also had Daniel there as well. I think Daniel would have roughly started.
Yeah, Daniel was on the floor then as well. Yeah.
So it was an incredible. I mean, you not only the costume around, the people that you would be able to sort of absorb information from, and that you came through cutting into. It was a great. That must have been a great experience for you. With that.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like I said, I really loved working there so much. And then obviously, I was there as well when you moved to Hendon, and we had to shift everything out of there. And I was meaning to, because I was listening to Vanessa Lingham's, because obviously she was there as well at the same time as I was, and she was saying about to Richard that she remembers being in that building after everything was out of it, and it was incredible when that building was beautiful anyway, but like when everything was out of it, you're like, oh my god, I can see why this is prime real estate now. It is like it was insane. You had views on both sides and all that.
The building was beautiful, but for what it was for, it wasn't. I mean, if you compare Camden to Hendon, for example, as a costume house, Hendon works far better than Camden, but Camden's building was just something else.
Yeah, but there's function and there's heart, isn't there?
Yeah,
and that Camden had heart in spades, and it just made you feel creative being in that building. It was just one of those peculiar things where it was just you just felt, I don't know, you felt creativity in that space.
We still, I mean, we're amazed we're still on the first question, but that's great. Which is, I'm fine with that. But so you were obviously working on quite a few productions. At what point, because you were only here for about 5 years, and did the step away from Angels come before you handed your notice in? And by that, I mean, was there that in your head that you were going to walk away and you had a job lined up, or was it, I'm going to risk it all, hand my notice and see what happens?
No, I felt a sense of responsibility to not have a job lined up, which sounds ridiculous.
No, it doesn't, because it's. I think Bart goes into it on a talk that Jonathan has with Bart, which is, or maybe it was Jonathan himself said it came out in the conversation. You can never time it. You can't. You can think you have, but you've got notice period. You've got all of this, and you don't want to be. It's really difficult. So if you can time it, it's incredible. But
no, it wasn't that. It wasn't that. It wasn't to do with timing. I'd specifically made sure that I was unemployed.
Oh, okay.
Purely out of respect for Angels. It was that's what it was. It was in my. I don't know what I was thinking in my brain, but I didn't think it was right for me to, because obviously when you're working there, you meet all these amazing designers and you get all these contacts, and that was what was amazing about it. Well, one of the things that was amazing about it, obviously the most amazing part about it was finding my love for costume, but it was invaluable in terms of building contacts for your work in the freelance industry outside, because I'd seen other people leave and sort of who'd already lined stuff up and like on purpose, and that there is, I can appreciate that, because I mean everybody has to pay their rent and all the rest of it, and it was fine, but it didn't sit right for me, because as I said, Angels really has given me my livelihood essentially, and I didn't feel right in using the contacts that I'd gained whilst working at Angels to line something up before I'd handed in my notice. So I knew I was going to hand in my notice, but I purposefully didn't get a job until after I'd left. So I had a period of quite a long time, I think, actually. It was at least a couple of months between leaving Angels and actually getting a job from someone, because I just didn't feel right to me. It felt disloyal, I suppose. And being that I'd worked at Angel for 6 years, obviously I had a degree of loyalty to the company for what they'd given me, and I just it didn't feel right. So I purposely went into unemployment again.
And what position did you start going? Because I mean, I know you quite quickly sort of became an assistant designer.
In some ways, yeah.
Step in between there, or was that just something that you? But how did you get to that? Because once you became an assistant, I mean, you just kept going, and the names of designers that you've worked with as assistant is quite incredible, actually, when you put it down and you look at it.
I've been really lucky.
How did you? What was the gap between? Well, how did you figure out to become an assistant costume designer?
It was just an evolution, I suppose, because I've always thought that, and this is probably me making my life difficult for myself as usual, it was important to experience all of the different jobs to be able to know what everyone's doing, and to have a level of empathy for different people's roles. And also, just in my head, I don't want to ask somebody to do something that I wouldn't do myself. Do you know what I mean? So obviously partly through necessity as well, because when you leave, again, at the time when I left Angels, things were starting definitely to pick up. The industry was getting a way load bigger than when I'd left it, when I started at Angels, should we say.
Yeah.
So I went into being a standby because that was the first thing. In fact, randomly, I didn't go straight into being a standby, I don't think, because one of the first things that worked on, really, really luckily, was This Is England when I left. And that, again, thanks to Richard Davis, because Jo Thompson, who designed it, she was looking for people. And because I haven't even talked about my penchant for youth culture, that's really one of my really exciting subjects that I love is the evolution of youth culture throughout period, really. So Richard Davis had said, "Oh, well, Nat's left Angels. Why don't you tap him up and meet him and see if you like him?" And she did, fortunately, like me. And then I worked on that, which was unbelievable. And for one of the first jobs coming out, I think it was either my first or my second job, I think, coming out of Angels. It was amazing because it was a time that was basically, the character in it, Sean, was the same age as I was in that time period. And I remember, skinheads and being terrified of them around our way, and sort of, and all the two-tone boys and all this stuff. So I had a personal connection to it. But then obviously with it being Shane Meadows, I knew Shane Meadows' work before that as well. So I was like totally psyched to be working on anything that he was involved with, because I just thought he was amazing. I'd seen 24/7 before that. I just loved 24/7 so much. So I was over the moon. And that was up until recently, even, I'd say that was one of my premium experiences in the film industry, was that job.
Well, I'd also say, I mean, when you look at the things that you've worked on and what you've done, there's a few of your projects that you just sit there and go, well, there's nothing else for Nat to work on, but This Is England is definitely a Nat production. I think when I heard you were doing, which we'll get to at some point, creation stories, again, that's something I don't know why. I just think that's in your wheelhouse. Pirates, it's something I don't think it fits comfortably with you. It's not the case of, I don't know why. That's the persona from knowing you and things like that. But then on the flip side, Wonder Woman is also up your street as well, to a point as well. So
all about
so it's really interesting. So a lot of the projects you've worked on have been really, from knowing you, are perfect for you.
Yeah, well, again, when I left Angels, I did make a concerted effort to only do which again is making my life difficult. But to work on jobs that I felt had value rather than just anything. I was really picky, which is again why I didn't work for quite a long time after leaving Angels, because I was just like, well, I'm not working on that. And that was partially arrogance, I think, but partially, you have to be mindful that this is your body of work represents you. And yeah, you're right. Creation Stories, when it came up, I was just like, this is mine. And same with Pirates. So when I got the script for Pirates, thank you again to Sharon Long, who told me about it, because she'd been approached about it, and then she was kind of like, I don't really know why they've asked me to read the script, because it's just not me. But it is totally you. And I was like, well, okay. And she was like, we'll see if your agent can get the script for it. And they wouldn't see me, and I don't know why, but they wouldn't. But my agent was like doggedly on them and just saying, this is the person, you have to see him. Just see him. It's not even, you don't even have to give him the job. Just see him. Can you just please see him? And it went on and on for about 2 weeks. And then eventually they relented and said, well, okay, you can read the script. And I read the script, and because I only partially had a vague idea about it from what Sharon had said, and she was just like, oh, it's UK garage scene and it's 1999, and that was basically all she told me. And I was like, this sounds amazing. I've so badly got to do this. And then when I read the script, I said to Bart, I was like, this is mine. This is my job. Nobody else is going to get it. It's my job. I've got to do this job. And then fortunately, again, like Reggie Yates, who's directing it, gave me the job, and I was over the moon. I was so happy, I can't tell you.
I'm not. I won't lie. I am quite excited when that finally comes out.
Gonna be unbelievable. You would not, honestly. I'm so excited about it, and it's so annoying that we had to sort of down tools when we only had like 8 days left to shoot. But
I genuinely think that's a topic that I think with retro and all of that, I don't think people properly understand how many people were into garage music and that scene today. That will hit such an, in the same way that, well, it could. Obviously, I could be completely wrong, but I don't mean like with Bohemian Rhapsody. That was a perfect time when that film came out. But I'd say a film on garage music, if it's done well, which of course I know it would have been done well by you guys, but I can see it being so popular. Really,
I have this love of music, and if I could have been a musician, I would have been a musician. But again, I wasn't. I don't think I was quite good enough. And also, to me, it's this music is this perfect art form that I just don't want to ruin by sort of destroying the image that it gives me. The pleasure that it gives me, because like when I loved films, I still love films. But now I see films in a different way, because you're constantly analysing them. And before that, I had this purer vision of them, if you see what I mean. You're not constantly thinking. Like, I've got this awful tick of, because I worked at Angels for so long, we used to watch programmes or films, and I'd be like, yeah, I know that waistcoat, I know that. Like, even when I was watching, this is even more random. When I was watching Bohemian Rhapsody, I don't think I've said this to Julian, but I can't think what it was now. I think it might have been a shirt. But anyway, I gave you a load of my stock because I was trying to get rid of my stock because I didn't want the storage anymore. So I gave you a load of my 80s stock that we'd had from Ashes to Ashes.
Yeah. I
gave it to you guys. And then when we were watching Bohemian Rhapsody, I was like, Freddie Mercury's wearing my shirt.
I'm so glad you have that. I get it from randomly, because all my clothes are in this building. Every single piece of clothes I ever own. So randomly, when there's some T-shirts on kids that turn up in random films, I'm just like, oh my God, that's my T-shirt. My grandmother's shoes turned up on Maggie Smith on Lady in the Van, and she was so proud of this. And you're sitting there going, I'm glad she's not seen the film, because she realizes what Maggie Smith's character is in Lady in the Van. It's a compliment.
Yeah. It's like, yeah. Anyway,
assistant costume designing. You've worked with a lot of different designers. You've worked with Lindy Hammond quite a lot. You worked with Susie Harmon quite a lot. What's the difference between an assistant costume designer and the supervisor? And also, where's the breakdown of the work between designer, assistant designer, and the supervisor? That's a massive question, I know, but I think it's one a lot of people don't understand, and it's a really interesting role that you do as an assistant costume designer, which again is really, really important.
The difference between how an assistant designer and a supervisor work together, or
the breakup of the work, because I'm sure, because if you look in theatre, the supervisor at times, at least Jonathan has also said it, is whoever his assistant is basically the supervisor, just because of the natural size of everything in theatre. But on film and TV, it's different. It is completely different. That they're not similar roles at all. But a lot of people might think they are. Or am I wrong with that?
Yeah. No, I mean, well, weirdly. So, as a for instance, I did this film with Michelle Clapton, which I was over the moon with working with Michelle. My other half, Katarina Barashova, she'd worked with.
You said that I was going to butcher it, and I apologize.
And she'd worked with Michelle quite a few times before, and so Michelle knew me through Kat really more than anything else. I had never worked for Michelle at all. But anyway, this job that I did, it was small. It was a small film, and it had Paul Bettany in it, and she knew that I didn't want to be a supervisor, which I didn't, but she needed a supervisor. And there was no budget for an assistant designer. So what we agreed to do was I got an assistant designer credit on it. It was called Blood. That's what it's called. And I got an assistant designer credit on it, but I had to be a supervisor and an assistant designer in one, which was quite complicated because mainly because I didn't want to be a supervisor in any way, shape or form. But at the time I was kind of like, well, it'll be another assistant design credit. And I really like Michelle and she's brilliant. And it was in between. I think she'd just done the first season of Game of Thrones, and then in her time off, she was doing this Blood film, and so nobody knew that Game of Thrones was going to blow up like it did. And obviously, everybody knows that her style and it is imbued in Game of Thrones across the whole thing. But we hadn't seen any of it at that point, so it was just, it's Michelle. She's a designer, and I like her. And then she became this huge power costume designer.
Also, to cut your teeth as an assistant with a cast that Blood had. I mean, Paul Bettany, Stephen Graham, and Brian Cox. Yeah. You couldn't ask for better three leading actors. And Mark Strong. Sorry, almost forgot.
Yeah, Mark Strong. Yeah, yeah.
You couldn't, 4 actors to be working with quite closely in that role. That would have been a great experience. And Michelle.
Yeah, and I knew Stephen Graham from before as well, because obviously from This Is England.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were fantastic, and it was a really lovely. And we went out to Liverpool.
But you had to do both roles.
Yeah, but I had to do both roles at the same time, so that was quite difficult. And we're in Liverpool, so I didn't really know anybody to getting dailies in and all that sort of thing. So it was a scramble for me for sure. But yeah, so there's a for instance of, not always. I don't know if that would still happen now. I mean, that wasn't so long ago, but anyway, I'd say I do have involvement with the supervisor when I'm being an assistant designer, because I think it's been said many times before, but all supervisors supervise in different ways. Like Annie Crawford is very, very involved, and so's Dan Grace. And so I would be speaking a lot to them, and Annie's very knowledgeable as well. Not that Dan isn't as well. Dan is very, very knowledgeable. But they both, I suppose both those two people are kind of like, they're designers in their own right in a kind of a way, because they're so knowledgeable about all the stuff that we would do, about costume in general, that I don't know as much as they know about some things, especially, when we were doing Wonder Woman 1. Yeah, I'd never done any First World War military at all, and it with good old Terry Facer in tow, Terry sort of did the crowd side of it, and I think I did all of the men's military on that, and I had to learn all of that stuff in the prep period, which was a lot, and researching every medal that the Kaiser wears and stuff, because to clear it, and don't think anybody's talked about clearances yet, because that's not very exciting. But on Warner Brothers films, it's a lot. It's a lot. They wanted to know everything, as I said, on the Kaiser and on General Ludendorff.
And you You created a sort of fictitious German army uniform for them all in the chemical factory. Am I right with that one as well?
The chemical factory. Well, the uniforms that all of the Germans wear are true. We had certain made up things where, like, there's the bomber at the end. I designed these bomber all-in-ones for these bomber pilots and parachutes, and I had to get all these different parachute clips and straps and stuff, and we had to remake them as into something that looked like it was from the First World War. So we had to source all that stuff and had to figure out how it all went together. And then we had to make extra, like we made little seals to put over the tops of the buckles so that they looked, I think we had a German seal or something put on the top of the parachute clip. And you don't see them at all. You see them really in passing. But I was really, really happy with them. I'll show you them one day. But it was painstaking, the research that I did on it. And, Lindy was super happy with them as well. She was like, oh, these are great. And even Terry said they were the best bombers that he'd ever seen. And I was like, oh, my God, this is fantastic. And then, you see them in passing.
Can I then ask, what is the role of the assistant costume designer then? As far as Nat Turner is concerned, what is the role of an assistant designer on a production?
Well, the primary goal is to support your costume designer. That is your job, as far as I'm concerned. And to look out for them and remind them about things they might have forgotten, and to be in the background, I suppose, which is what's been tricky for me. I suppose in the same way that I kind of self-sabotaged myself when I left Angels, in that I didn't feel it was right for me to be too self-serving. I feel the same way about being an assistant. It's like it's not for me to be front and center. I'm supposed to be in the background, and if Lindy or the designer that I'm working with asks me my opinion, then I'll give it, obviously, and in a fitting. And very much, Lindy's been unbelievable. She's always pushing me forwards, and always, like, stuff that we do on Wonder Woman and Paddington and stuff. If I'd primarily done whatever the costume was, she'll say to the director, she'll say to the producer, she'll say, well, that's all Nat, and you don't get a lot of designers who do that, because it's a difficult thing to do, because you're supposed to kind of take credit for.
But that's also not Lindy, which is lovely to know.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love working with Lindy as well. I wish I could have started working with her sooner, before she got closer to her retirement, but I am there to support them and to help them, and to come up with different ideas as well. I mean, again, when I'm working with Lindy, Jill Taylor I've worked with quite a lot as well.
And you've worked on the job with Jane Petrie, Charlotte Walters, Susie Harman,
and Liza Bracey as well. Liza Bracey really, really helped me as well, and thank you, Liza, for when I did Babylon.
That was one I was going to, because when we start talking to you about when you started designing, you were designer on Babylon on the first season, were you not?
I was co-designer with Liza. Yeah,
that must have been a really interesting one, because the first episode that you guys co-designed was directed by Danny Boyle. So Babylon was Babylon really the first big design job for you?
Oh, well, I'd have to slightly correct you on that, just for clarity. But yeah, the pilot that Danny did, that was all Liza.
Okay.
But when we went on to the series, which was directed by Sally Al Husseini and John S. Baird. John S. Baird obviously went on to do the Laurel and Hardy film, which was unbelievable. The series I did do with Liza, it wasn't my first big, because I'd also co-designed. Weirdly, I think I ended up doing a lot of these co-designing things because I've been a bit deferential in my assistant designing. Like I drilled it into my own head that it wasn't for me to be front and center, and I'd have to be back. And then obviously when you step up to being a costume designer, you can't really be backwards. You have to be more forwards. And it's taken me a long time to get that into my head, and I'm still learning it now, to be honest, because it doesn't feel natural for me still to be the person who's like, hey, how you doing? But I'm getting better at it, I hope. But yeah, the first big design thing was Ashes to Ashes with Rosie Hackett. That was the first thing that I did that was proper. And then I had a massive gap because I didn't feel comfortable. But I mean, Ashes to Ashes was great because it evolved every series. Like we changed the look every series, and it got. I think it's fair to say it got sort of progressively slicker as it went through. And the third series looks the most sort of polished. Well, I hope Rosie's not going to dislike me saying that, but anyway, to me it does. And I think that was right because you were going from the early '80s, which wasn't quite, wasn't as polished, to the more like the mid '80s, which is a sort of stronger fashion period. The early '80s was quite scrappy and a bit '70s and massive unemployment and all that sort of thing. When you get through to the mid '80s, you've got a bit more aspiration.
What initially excites or draws you to a project? I mean, before you've already said music is something that's important to you, so that's you went after Pirates. But what initially draws you to a project when you're going to design?
It's always the script. Always the script. I mean, I am trying to be less picky because now I have a family to feed, etc., rather than just myself. It's always to do with the script, and it's probably because of where I am at the moment in my career, but I get a lot of scripts that are just bad, frankly. If I get a good one like Pirates or Creation Stories, which is then I'm going to go for it. But I can find interest in the most mundane things. It's ridiculous when you start getting into, once you start researching something and you sort of get locked onto it, the minutiae of detail gets smaller and smaller. It's kind of like with Pirates, it's literally we're down to kind of postcode specific costumes of the time because Reggie Yates, who directs it, it's loosely based on his teen years, and he grew up in two areas. I think he sort of grew up in North London, but he also grew up in South London as well. So it's, we'd have these conversations like Nike trainers, for instance. We got Nike Air Max 95s and all, like silver bullets and 97s and stuff like that. And he'd be like going, no, those weren't the trainers to have. What the people around our way would want would be like, they'd be wearing Reebok workouts, but they'd be wearing Reebok workouts with the light blue sole. It's called the ice sole and stuff. And I'd be like, okay. And then I'd have to try and find these trainers, which I got a pair of. That's what I get into, is these tiny details that most people aren't going to pick up on, I would say, except for people probably who lived it, and that's what we're doing the film for, frankly. And I think what's really important about Pirates is it's a really positive film, and it's portraying London in this positive light, and it's going to be I think it's going to be a really good feeling film. And it's so important that what's brilliant about it is it's like it's all positive. There's none of this sort of knife crime stuff and all that. I mean, all that stuff happens and it's important as well. But it's also really important to see London as an exciting, positive place, because it is that as well. I've totally gone off subject again.
Will there be lots of Dolce & Gabbana, Moschino and Hackett, or you avoided those common traits from...
It is label city as well. That's what's really amazing about this film, is there is labels everywhere. Like normally, I kept saying to them all the way through it, I was kind of like, but are we okay with this in terms of clearance? Because normally when you're doing a film, nobody wants to see any logos anywhere. Do you know what I mean? No logos, no nothing. Like, and after doing all of these, Warner Brothers films like Wonder Woman stuff, where everything had to be cleared, and you'd have to go through every hoop, and then they'd still say, no, you can't wear it. They can't wear Adidas trainers, and you're like, but why not? It's just nonsense. So on Pirates, it's like we've got Moschino everywhere. I mean, Moschino and Versace are the main ones that we've got in there. There's quite a bit of Ralph Lauren Polo, but it's like logos everywhere, and it's all been cleared. It's all fine apparently, which is amazing, because you can't do that. What irks me about films when you don't include labels, especially in contemporary films, it's like so much about contemporary fashion is about labels, and when you get rid of it, you're getting rid of some of the truth. And the fact that we've been allowed to put all that stuff in is so brilliant, and because it's absolutely correct that it should be there. Like on Wonder Woman 2, we every single, I think I'm right in saying, every single army,
every single police enforcement officers, every single badge, metal badges, cloth badges, all of that stuff we had to create from nothing because they wouldn't let us use anything.
And that's something people don't realize. It's part of costume. You can,
Yeah.
they might want, which will lead us on to another question, which is about accuracy, which we've got to stop adding questions onto here. But it's, you want to be accurate, but you're not allowed to be. You can be accurate as long as it's wrong.
Yeah.
I was going to ask what project you most enjoyed designing for, but by the sounds of it, you've loved Pirates like quite a lot, and also
Pirates and Creation was right. Creation Stories is amazing because they're both amazing in different ways. I mean, again, everybody says this. It's kind of like whatever the last job you did was your most favorite job, and then, well, actually, it's probably not. The job that you just finished, you probably hate, and then in about 6 months' time, you're like, yeah, that wasn't so bad. You do love them all, but like Creation Stories would be completely. It would have been impossible to do without Angel's support because the budget that we had was ludicrous, and the fact that you accommodated it and just sort of gave me carte blanche really to use stuff was unbelievable because there's 70 principal cast in that film, and I didn't even have an assistant designer on that. And if I didn't have the resource of Angels, there's no way you could do that. And we went through three decades, 70s, 80s, 90s. Oh, and we went into 2000 as well at the end. Without having you helping us, that there's no way that we could have done that film. And I can't wait to see it. I still haven't seen it yet because it's getting pushed back to next year now, unfortunately. A whole big part of my process, and I think it's probably from being a costumier at Angels, is that, like, for instance, some people will say, oh yeah, well, that person, they wear Burberry or whatever, or they definitely be wearing Gucci loafers and da-da-da. I can't really see characters that way as as through a brand eyeglass or something. I can see them when I'm going through rails of clothes and I'm looking at. I might have a vague idea for something that I'm after, and then I find something and then I build from that. But then also when you're going through the rails at Angels, you're looking. Like I said, I'll start out with an initial idea of maybe I'm looking for this style of jacket or whatever. And then you come across something else that you weren't necessarily looking for, but you're like, but actually now I've seen this, that would bring something else out of out of the character of the person you're trying to create that you wouldn't have done with what you were thinking of initially. And it just sparks off this dialogue, I suppose, in my own head when I'm there to create people.
And I know you've done it on other productions with when you were not designing. I know on Wonder Woman you were looking through things, and I think you'd even said to me, I don't think we're taking stuff, I'm just trying to get some ideas for what we could do.
Once you see the clothes, it's so valuable. You can see photographs all you like, but when you see the clothes in reality and you see the weight of them and the weight of the cloth and the stitching detail and all of these things that you can kind of rip off and make your own.
We've got to the moment, Nat. We've got to the final question.
I didn't talk about Paddington. What I was going to say when you sort of said best job, I mean, best job in terms of designing myself. Yeah, we've gone through that as Creation and Pirates at this moment in time. But assistant designing, because as you say, I've done a fair bit of that. It's like Paddington all the way. Paddington's like the most beautiful film ever made, and it's just joy. I want them to keep making them forever, and I think Lindy feels the same. It's just amazing, and Paul King is like a genius, such a genius, and the sort of the positivity that those films sort of spread, I think is one of the most valuable things I've been involved with. And in terms of the creative process, it's just genius because it's caricature, but it isn't. Obviously, I watched Paddington cartoons when I was growing up, and my mum and dad read it to me and stuff like that. The interesting challenge with it is that we had a kind of, they're so colourful, those films, that they're quite complicated in terms of trying to figure out, again, timelines of characters, because for instance on the first film we were kind of using red as a signifier for people's happiness and stuff, being that it is the same colour as Paddington's hat. But at certain points, Paul would say, "Oh, I want them to wear this red in this scene," and we'd be like, "But that other person's wearing that red," and you just get a whole sea of red everywhere. It was very interesting in terms of trying to deal with the sheer amount of colour that Paul wanted to put in there, and obviously the sets and the production design are unbelievable as well. we were all sort of going down the same thing. But it was worrying to us that we thought it was. I think Lindy thought as well. She thought it was just going to look like madness, because it seemed like we were throwing everything at it, which we were. But it kind of works. It's the kind of the aesthetic of the film, I suppose.
Paul King is also, from a comedy point of view, with the way he films, and if you look at what he's done in the past, the TV he used to film, Mighty Boosh and Come Fly With Me and all of those sort of things, he's got a great history of filming comedy, and Paddington fits into that wheelhouse, but allows it to be for children as well.
But what's brilliant about me as well is I don't know if this has been said or not, but he actually is Paddington. Like, as a person, physically, he's sort of become Paddington. But when they're rehearsing, he also is Paddington. So he'll like roll around and stuff like Paddington's going to do. It's amazing. It's so brilliant to see. And I don't know if the actors find it helpful or not, but it's brilliant because he's Paddington.
My final question, we have finally got there, Mr. Turner, is what piece of advice would you give to someone who wants to come into costume, which is clearly listen to this and then just repeat? Or no,
follow my example of not knowing what you're doing ever throughout your entire life, and you might be okay.
Yeah, I mean, is there a piece of advice you'd give to people who want to get into this industry?
People's experience, I think, coming into it now is very different, because they're used to getting paid money, whereas when I started, it's like, forget about it, you're not going to get paid much, but you're sort of doing it because you want to do it, and you love films and stuff. It's important for anybody coming into the industry to keep a hold of the idea of what they want to do, because I would imagine that it's quite easy to get sucked into this kind of dailies world where you're getting paid money, and that's all great, and you can have a nice life and stuff, but it's not necessarily going to become a career for you, say. I mean, some people might want to do that. They might be happy with that. It just depends on what you want to do in the long run and how happy you are going to be. But I think it'd be easy to get stuck in that world. So be selective, I suppose. That's what I would say. To maybe you can possibly glean from the ridiculous ramblings that I've just said. I was selective at the beginning of my career, because it is your body of work. Everything you do is to do with your body of work, and I feel anyway that you should be happy with the stuff that you've been involved with. And if you're not, then either maybe you're not interested in that stuff and you just want to make a living, or you're going to be unhappy.
Be aware of what you're doing and where you want to go to a point.
Yeah, as I said previously as well, it's like, working at Angels just provided the founding of all the knowledge that I've gained, since being there. It was invaluable for me. I have said to people that they should work at Angels, to be honest. The more difficult hurdle these days is not getting trapped in sort of daily crowd world, because I think so many people get sucked into that and get used to having a nice quality of life that they forget that maybe what they got into it in the first place for is to be creative. And not saying that being a daily crowd person isn't creative, because that can be massively creative. That's partially what I love doing the crowd so much, because you're kind of left to your own devices. Much more so than when you're doing principals, because you don't have like a producer and a director and an actor, giving you their input into what they want to, what they think it should be. When you've got an extra, you kind of like, well, you're going to wear this. They don't get as much say. I mean, you don't want them to be uncomfortable, obviously, but you can be more creative maybe with them. But
it's a hard thing. There's a lot of big productions out there, and what's happened. I'll use Harry Potter as an example. That one, which is you had all these people working on Harry Potter, and all they did was go from one Potter to the next. There's no issue with doing that, but for some people, that's not what's going to fulfill them, and for you, that's not what you want. When I was an AD, that was certainly not what I wanted. I went out my way not to go on one of those sort of productions, because I just didn't want to get stuck in a cycle of the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I get into it for variation. I mean, that's the important thing, is that I'm learning something different, and it's that every job is different from the next one, and that is the absolute joy of costume, is that everything is different. I mean, even if you're doing two jobs that are 80s back to back, they can be completely different looks at the 80s or 70s or whatever, and
thank you so much, Nat. That's been fantastic to listen to. You've gone
No, it has been long. It has been long. Don't get me wrong.
Really appreciate the time. So thank you.
Well, I hope you can edit it into something that makes sense. Can you reform all of my sentences so they make sense?
Well, Nat, thank you so much. That was fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, mate.
Well, that was my conversation with Nat. I always enjoyed talking with Nat, and I actually saw him this week, and I hope you got from the interview just how excited he is about this new project that he's been working, which they're just finishing, which is Pirates, which he is so excited being back on set and seeing it, and I can't wait to see it. I mean, it's a big part of when I grew up was the music it's all about. So it's lovely to see how excited he's been about it and getting back in that world. And it's one that he's very proud of, even though it's not come out yet.
Good.
It was really interesting to listen to Nat about how much influence he actually gives to the librarian for the way he researches and when he gets lost in detail and everything like that. And it's something I think we need to speak at some point about, is how people do research and what they mean and how detailed they go. But it was amazing for him to actually be pointing and going, the librarian who used to work, he had a huge impact on me.
No, I think that's quite a valid point. Although they used to be damned annoying if you're looking for a costumier and they'd be sitting in there chatting away about things various instead of actually getting on with some costume. You know, it's like
fantastic. What the librarian was the Angel's internet at the time.
Yes, no, absolutely.
She was a dab hand at a microfiche.
She was, wasn't she? But I wish I could remember her other name now. Marlena Adams.
I definitely think it's a conversation to have at some point, just to maybe, even if it's just one scene or one production, maybe Jonathan you might be willing to do it with something with Fiddler or something, just to talk about what the research process is, or what exactly, but how it works with costume, what you actually disappeared down, what wormholes and things like that. Because I think it's a really interesting thing that people might not. It's not just about using Google and Wikipedia, for example. There's a lot more you can do with the research, and people do get lost in it. And when you see people who do live in their research, it's fantastic to see how they organise and what they find.
Well, what I've also noticed now, I've been looking for some reference today on British Army, and almost everything takes you to a Pinterest board, you know, and Pinterest isn't really the way forward.
No, because it's subject to what somebody says that item is. So you're it's I think exactly. I think it was a chat that I had with Lisa Duncan, and she pointed out very pertinently that actually, yes, everything's out there on the internet and everything is available if you type in what it is that you're looking for, but you have to be very careful that what comes up is actually correct for what you're looking for, because it's all subjective to what that person who posted it says about it, and it's not always right.
Listen to the creak of a saddle as Richard mounts yet another one of his hobby horses. You know, all of this reenacting stuff that's going on out there, this drama, documentary, reconstruction stuff, is incredibly dangerous, because they're quite often low-budget drama documentaries, which means they're fudging things. But because there is no kind of disclaimer along the bottom of this particular bit of footage, in years to come, this will become as accepted as real reference as anything else.
See, I have the same view with The Crown, which is, don't get me wrong, I think The Crown's a great TV and loads of people enjoy it. There's storytelling within it. And give it 5 or 10 years, and people are going to believe what they saw in The Crown is real because they didn't see it and they don't.
Do you mean about the script, or do you mean about specific detail in terms of what an equerry?
I think mixture of all of it. I mean, with all of it, with different things, is the second you see it's in a TV, or as Richard said on a docudrama, well, it's a documentary, it has to be true. Or The Crown, it was based on real things. So it's really interesting, the fact that what does get taken for reality versus what actually was the truth.
Yeah. And now, you know, you've got people colorizing old black and white footage. So therefore, again, somebody's interpretation of what, and again, I am on uniforms, of course, what actually, you know, the color of a uniform was is totally dictated by what they're seeing that's been manufactured on a computer. And it is a concern, I think.
Well, it's a perfect example of why people get lost in so much of the minutiae of detail, as Nat says in his interview.
Yeah.
The next interview we're going to be releasing is Richard's conversation with Alex Fordham.
Alex Fordham, yes, another ex-member of staff. In fact, we inherited him when we took over Berman's. He was already in the men's period department at that point. I like talking to him. He's gone on to do things. Works a lot with Michelle Clapton. Again, what we were talking about in the intro previously about designers and designer assistants. Yeah. But he and Michelle have certainly.
It's that trust, isn't it? And I think Alex brings a certain, he contributes to Michelle's vision and how she wants to realize a world, and he can do that. And in fact, if you think of Game of Thrones, and I haven't seen Secret Garden yet, but that was the type of costuming that Alex was doing when he was working at Berman's, wasn't it?
Yes. I mean, certainly playing to his strength. I'm not sure that giving him a sort of a contemporary production would necessarily be something that he'd be particularly interested in, but he is interested in uniforms and he's interested in sort of period costume generally, and he's very good at it as well.
And I've always sensed that curiosity and that ability to investigate and discover and then reveal the nuances of items and how they sort of fall into character.
Another person who actually sort of fell into the costume business by accident, as you'll hear in the interview. I think he actually applied for a job as a librarian.
And notice, Alex, I haven't used the word practitioner. Narrative.
We have had journey though.
In the nice way that the link between Sinead and Nat was Lindy Hemming. The link between Nat and Alex is Michelle Clapton, because Nat worked as an assistant designer on That With Blood. So there you go. We're connecting every interview we're doing. So
we are the biggest game of consequences in the world.
Here we are. And so here is a small excerpt from Richard's conversation with Alex Fordham.
An assistant designer is really there to make sure that the designer's concepts get to screen. They will have all their tussles with directors. We will have conversations with actors in fittings. The process is quite clear cut. But in between all of that, when you're talking about how you're going to pull it off and how you assess those characters, that's where the real assistant work comes in. Is that I often have this thing that I'm a bit like Sergeant Wilson. Is that wise? And we laugh about it. Sort of. I'm going to do. Is that wise? And I think it is. An assistant has to do that sometimes, but obviously, yes, the designer is the designer, and you have to. The evolution of it is the exciting thing, and it's getting their ideas to the screen is what you're there for.